Hello, I'm Trent Bullock, Senior Pastor of First Baptist Church in Paris, Tennessee. Thank you for joining our broadcast today. As we begin to look toward Easter and the celebration of Jesus' resurrection, I'll be sharing with you a series of messages based on the 7 last words of Christ from the cross. In today's message from Luke's Gospel, chapter 23, verses 33 and 34, we will consider Christ's first words from the cross, "Father, forgive them." Right now, I invite you to join us as we worship the Lord. This morning, I want to ask you to take your Bibles and be finding Luke's Gospel, chapter 23. Luke, chapter 23, and in just a few moments, we're going to read a couple of verses from that chapter. This morning, by way of introduction, I want to speak to you about last words. You know, throughout history, we have recorded for us the last words of some famous people. We often refer to them as famous last words. As I was looking over some of those words this week, I found the words of some of our presidents. For instance, George Washington, as he was breathing his last breath, said this, "It is well, I die hard, but I am not afraid to go." John Adams said this, "Thomas Jefferson still survives." Thomas Jefferson, who died on the same day as Adams, asked this question, "Is it the 4th?" referring to July the 4th, 1826. Woodrow Wilson, another president, said, "I am ready." Those are the last recorded words we have of these presidents. Then we have the recorded words, the last recorded words of other people, and one I found interesting was P.T. Barnum. You remember him. Promoted the greatest show on earth. Here were his last words. What were today's receipts? That's what he wanted to know as he was breathing his last breath. But then we have the last recorded words of people like C.H. Spurgeon, who said this, "Jesus died for me." Those were the last words of the Prince of Preachers. We have the last recorded words of John Wesley, who said, "The best of all is, God is with us." The last recorded words of Dr. R.G. Lee, the longtime pastor at Bellevue Baptist Church in Memphis, said this, "I see the great lights of glory, and it is even more beautiful than I imagined." Those were his last words. You know, it's interesting to think about the last words that people speak, and those last moments before they pass from this life into the next. Well, those last words are interesting, and they gave us some insight into those people. But this morning, I want us to begin thinking about the last words of Christ while he was here upon this earth. You know, Jesus in his time of ministry here upon this earth said a lot of very important things. He taught us a lot of important lessons. But it was in those final hours as he was dying on the cross that he shared with us probably some of the most important words that he could share with us. On the day that Jesus was crucified, we know that he hung on the cross from about 9 in the morning to about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And during those 6 hours, he spoke 7 times from the cross. And those words that he spoke have been called the 7 last words of Christ from the cross. This morning, and all the way up until the Sunday before Easter, I want us to consider those 7 last words of Christ. We're going to look at them individually. And on that last Sunday, we'll look at a couple of them in preparation for Resurrection Sunday. But I want us to think about the significance of these words, and I want us to think about what was Jesus teaching us as he was speaking those very important last words here upon earth. We're going to begin this morning by looking at the first statement, or the first set of words that he shared with us, and they're recorded in Luke's Gospel, chapter 23. Now, just to give you the context of the verses we're going to read in Luke's Gospel, chapter 23, he shares with us the information surrounding those last days, the last hours. He shares with us the information regarding how Jesus was placed on trial and he was condemned to die upon the cross. And it's interesting, I think, as we pick up in verse 4, we see there that Pilate looks at Jesus and he looks at the crowd and he says, I find no basis for a charge against this man. And yet, sensing the pressure from the crowd, he decided to send him on to Herod. Well, Herod sent him right back to Pilate. And then Pilate in verse 17 again says, he has done nothing to deserve death, therefore I will punish him and then release him. And yet the crowds cried, crucify him, crucify him. And Pilate, again, feeling the weight and the pressure of the crowd, handed him over to be crucified. Now I want us to look then at these two verses in Luke's Gospel chapter 23. Verses 33 and 34. And notice what we find here. Luke says, when they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. Those words of Jesus from the cross, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. The very first words of Christ on the cross, I want us to consider those words this morning, and I want us to notice three important things about those words. First of all, I want you to notice that they were the words of a prayer. They were the words of a prayer. As Jesus is watching and as he is there and they are nailing him to that cross, and they are beginning the process of crucifixion, and he is beginning that process of death, he utters these words, and they are the words of a prayer. Now, on Wednesday nights, we've been looking at the prayers of Jesus. A couple of Sunday nights ago, we noticed the importance of prayer. Now, here's Jesus. And as he is being crucified, he utters the words of a prayer. You see, Jesus was going to die the same way he lived. And even in his dying moments, he was praying. And we know that he prayed while he was here upon this earth. We noticed on another occasion how he prayed at his baptism. He prayed at his transfiguration. He prayed in solitary places. He prayed, as we looked at Wednesday night, in the Garden of Gethsemane. He prayed for himself. He prayed for others. And he prays for us. Jesus lived a life of prayer. And so as he is coming to those final hours and as he is about to die, he's dying the way in which he lived. He was praying. We're reminded over in the book of Hebrews, chapter 5 and verse 7, we find these words. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Jesus lived a life of prayer, and now as he's coming to that time of his death, he is praying once again. Once again, giving us an example. Once again, giving us a model to follow. And notice then how he begins his prayer. He simply says, Father. Father.